We are trying to stream from the competition that is called Mitropa Cup. It's the traditional competition of the countries from the Central Europe. 10 countries are usually coming together with teams, I mean, not necessarily the strongest teams. And this competition, surprisingly, has a very deep tradition of more than 30 years. And well, in this year, it's organized in Slovak city of Trenčín, and we have 10 women teams and 10 men teams. By accident, in this year, Slovakia is represented by two teams because the men team from Croatia failed to materialize. They couldn't pull the team together. The women of Croatia, they came, but the men had to be replaced with the 10th team, which is this time from Slovak Republic. My name is Darčnik. I used to play for Czechoslovakia, formerly then for Slovakia, quite a few Olympiads and so on. Now, due to my tender age, I am in the new position of the captain for the two Slovak teams. And today I'm stepping in for the annotator of this stream. We will be talking about all the games from the round number 4. The introduction at the beginning of the competition was very tense, very interesting. There are quite a few teams with good players. Even though the teams are usually made of the young players in their 20s, 30s. There are cases when somebody older is playing. I had to play yesterday for one of our players. Had to go to school in the second team, so I had the honor of participating, but this is more an accidental feature, so this is not systematic. The level of competition is surprisingly high. You have quite a few grandmasters, and well, very rarely the team that is competing is built up from the very strong players. This was the case in last year when it was organized in Germany in Affolda. Germany decided to, for once, to win the competition once it was organized on the national, on the home turf. And they came practically with the Olympic team and duly took the title of the winners in this competition. It's very interesting because this is quite a natural scene for many young players. Some of them grew up practically on these competitions, and well, it's not a surprise that each year every country is trying to pull together, if not the best, at least exciting team from the best young players. So it's like a test ground for bidding the players that have some chess future. We are in the round number 4, and I will be trying to go through the games and point out the most interesting points in each and every game. Well, the stream that we will be following is delayed by 15 minutes, so actually the games are a little bit more advanced. This is a feature used to protect the integrity and correctness of the competition, because when you have a delay of 15 minutes, actually what you see on the screen, and when we are sitting in the say hotel room, and you decide to help one of the players, actually you are very much out of the sync, because the position on the board is usually much advanced. Within 15 minutes many things can happen. We will start with the game from the match Austria-Switzerland. The surprising feature here is what you see on the board, that black decided to give up the center with a fifth move, e takes d4, which was a big surprise for white. And even though, nominally speaking, white should be happy about his ideal center, d4, e4, It won't be so easy after bishop g4 to hold everything together, and obviously Wiadecki with black knows what he's doing. I mean, when you see his time consumption so far, he's still on 1 hour 30 practically, he's playing on increment. And Bogner Sebastian has already burned 24 minutes of his allocated time, the normal time. Well, I'm not even talking about the increment. So obviously, White is trying to understand, why the surprise, why Black was willing to give up the center so willingly. And well, he needs to find a proper continuation. So he's taking his time because it might be critical for the future. When we move to the next, for the second board, you will see here the time consumption is more, I would say, balanced, and the position is well known. It was the opening was Queen's was more like Queen's Indian, even though there is no knight f6 played, but it will be played later. And the move a3 is actually an invention of Petrosian in the classical Queen's Indian defense. So after knight f6, knight f3, we have seen the absolutely normal position. And after d5, it's interesting. This is an interesting point, that when should White have taken on d5 with c takes d5, well, according to the chess principles, the strict chess principles, e takes d5 should be the appropriate move. But since White was getting, very good results, about 60% in statistically speaking in the database, these days the recapturing knight f6 d5 is much more common. Okay, it never happened in the game. White played queen c2, inviting Black to take on c4, but then after simple bishop e7, c takes d5, we have actually with a different move order reached one of the main lines, connected with knight d5. So even here, Black decided to take knight d5, and after e4, it's remarkable again that Black is ready to fight against the bigger center for White. Of course, what is critical is d and e file in each and every chess game, in each and every opening. It's a question, what is possible to achieve on the central squares, central files. I should say, central files are prominent in every chess opening. And well, if you manage to build up the strong center, it's certainly a bonus. On the other hand, the center might be an object of counterplay for Black. So it's not so easy, to hold onto the pawns, even if you have the good center. Okay, everything that happens, especially after queen c7, Black is hoping to exchange on d4 and after cd4 to trade the queens, which would certainly make it much easier for him to play the middle game. But White is avoiding it with queen e2. I mean, this has happened certainly before. And now we have the position after h4, h6, bishop e3. It will be quite interesting because the position is unbalanced. Unbalanced in the sense it's not so easy to strike against the Black king side. On the other hand, Black doesn't exactly have enough pieces. I mean, many White pieces are pointing towards the king side. But of course, the position is more or less, equal, or let's say playable for Black. But it certainly is full of life, and this might be, very interesting in the development, later on. I mean, also the time consumption for both players is more or less normal. Pyrer with White has spent a little less time because for him it's a natural scheme, and well, actually Black has to trade a little bit more carefully. The other player from Austria is Lothar Lukács. I mean, they are all improving, drifting towards 2500. I mean, these are very young players. I know from personal experience because I played one tournament last year in Vienna, and most of these players have participated in the tournament. So I know that they are quite good, and well, they have ideas about chess. This is an opening that is called Paulsen, and Paulsen is very special. You know, when you play Paulsen with black, you rely on the might of the pawn structure. Everything, you know, 6 out of 7 pawns for black are on light squares, and they are taking all or controlling all the critical squares: b5, d5, f5. The Sicilian, generally speaking, open Sicilian is quite a dangerous opening for practically any player, but it's not so easy, you know, here to understand, you know, what is going on, because white has a great mobility for pieces, you know, all the chances, and black is playing a little bit like hedgehog, like some animal that is refusing to let go, or you know, to let the enemy come closer. All these pawn moves are guaranteeing that you cover the dark squares with pieces. With knight from b8, you know, when it goes to c6, it will be on dark squares. Queen on d8, bishop on f8. Of course, you can't put all the pawns on the light squares and believe, you know, everything is okay. So you need the protection of the dark squares. But you know, that's why this opening, this is called the safest Sicilian, is, despite the fact that black is developing reasonably slowly. I mean, he's not catching up with the opponent. Certainly is doing everything in his might to avoid, you know, sudden attacks by the opponent, and slowly and gradually and slowly black is trying to catch up with the opponent. Of course, after knight c6, bishop c6, white is better developed, but there is little contact between pieces. I mean, actually, it's very difficult for white to, you know, start a conflict in this position, because, you know, black is so well protected. After rook e1, there might be an idea of knight d5, but you know, black is playing knight d7, and now white started to sink into deep thinking. He has burned already more than 30 minutes, and well, black has practically all the time still at his disposal. So, I mean, sometimes you can read by the time consumption, you know, what is going on behind the scenes, you know, what is, under the surface. You know, certainly white is trying to imagine what will happen in few moves and how he can possibly try to endanger the black setup. Okay, the fourth game of the match is more like a Sicilian, and Sicilian with a typical hole on d5 for black. I mean, this has been, you know, e5 after knight c6, knight d4, e5, which used to be popular in the past. I mean, these days after knight b5, nobody really tries knight f6 or a6, knight d6, queen d6, queen e7. I mean, that has fallen out of popularity. After d6, we have something that is called Chelyabinsk variation. And you know, after knight c3, a6, white is obliged to play a very uncanny move, knight a3. Even b5 is possible for black, but of course, you know, the theory, this used to be popular like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. Most of the games, you know, even on the top level, were played with this opening. Black is playing bishop e7 in order to avoid bishop g5. And after knight c4, knight f6, only now bishop g5 is coming and is causing maybe some small problems, because, you know, you threaten bishop f6 and knight d6. Black certainly knows what he is doing, but here the time consumption is more balanced on both sides. I mean, there is not a huge gap in preparation, and well, I hope both players know what they are doing. It's still too early to call the shots. You know, I wouldn't be able to guess, you know, who will prevail in the position. Position is certainly full of life, And well, that's the reason why the most popular opening of them all after e4 is Sicilian defense in many disguises. When you only take the knight or defense with a6, c takes d4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6. That's so popular that I believe it's the most played opening position after the move number 5 or 6. Okay, another match, or the second match we will be discussing is between Germany and Hungary. And here we are talking about something, another small revolution. Small revolution in the sense that, there were times when nobody in his right mind would react to something like c4 with c5, knight e5, queen c7, and after f4, d4. d4 is a small revolution in this type of positions because you are supposed to develop pieces, but with d4 you are trying to break the pattern of white set up in the center. After d4, if white ever wants to move the e-pawn, black will take on e3 and will create a small gap on d4 for the opponent. So, this is interesting. After d4, well, white has nothing better than e3 immediately, and now black actually refuses to take. My presumption was wrong. He actually played knight f7, d7. But, well, there is a suspicion that white is better in control. I'm not saying his position is better, but again, the time consumption for black is already respectable. After the first 9 moves, he has burned already half an hour of the allocated, the 1.5 hours for first 40 moves. And well, that is also an aspect that plays a role in each and every game. Of course, we are dealing with the question of material, of development, of controlling the position, but very important feature is also the time consumption on the clock, because well, there is another element of time in chess, and this element of time is related to the tempo of the position that you are playing. Well, tempo, it's like a internal, measure. How quickly is the position played? Is it quick position? Is it slow position? Is it very, I would say, maneuver-like, or is it, something really better? Okay, this is something that is important, in every game. And well, knight f3, I choose the moment to talk about it because knight e5, knight f3 has actually invested, white has invested 2 tempes, but the tempes are, well, they are maybe, invested for a good measure, because black played knight f6, d7, which he would otherwise not decide to play if the knight would not have been on e5. I'm not claiming that knight is good or bad on d7. I see the very nice spot for it on c5, so there might be still a future for this piece. So, difficult to guess, what is going on. Certainly the pawn on d4 is a courageous, for black, is a courageous prospect. White typically has the pawn on d5 in all those, Benoni positions or King's Indian positions. But if black decides to play d4, he's still half a move behind white. And well, it was in the past perceived as a sign of courage, and well, the players were not so sure, if it is good or bad prospect. Well, now we will see. I mean, knight a3 is the move. White is hoping to play either knight c2 and support, attack against d4 and b4 at the same time, or even sometimes knight b5, bothering the queen, and then the d4 pawn is still in danger. Well, this seems to be, quite original and interesting, because I have seen similar positions, but without White having played f4. So certainly White is playing so quickly, as if he knew what is going on. Maybe he had a game like this already, in his practice. So we will see what comes out of it a little bit later. The game is on the second board, in the match Germany and Hungary, is played with, well, this is like a Queen's Gambit. uh, is trying to get advantage in the line when White didn't object to exchange of the queens on the b3, which gave him double pawns. But on the bright side, he has the semi-open a file, and put some pressure. He can put some pressure on the a pawn. But it's a little bit difficult to see how you can open up the position in the center to the benefits of White. I believe the position is more or less even though it would be difficult to guess it from the point of White is certainly seriously ahead on time, and Black is not so sure if everything what he is doing is correct. Simply because obviously White knows what he is doing. I can't claim that Black doesn't, but certainly White is more confident because he practically used no time for the first 17 moves. He is still on the clock 1:31, and Black has less than 1 hour. I mean, such disparities are indicative that Black is struggling a little bit with the position, not quite sure how to handle it, and White pretends he knows perfectly well what is going on. The next game is on the board number 3. This is much more standard. Open Spanish, open Spanish that is again becoming quite popular. Of course, if Black in the move number 5 takes on e4, he is breaking, some of the rules. First of all, black is behind in development at that moment. He's opening the file that is leading to his own king and all that. But to refute it just like that is not possible. So white has to play according to well-known paths, with d4, opening up the files and diagonals in the position, creating a situation that is a little dangerous for black. And black after d4 would do very well to tame down his optimism and try to close the position as much as possible with b5 and d5. I mean, this position was played many times. Then it has fallen a little bit into disrepute because not only due to the computers, but due to the fashion. To be honest, sometimes the lines are exceedingly popular for the simple reason that some good player is beginning to revive it and plays it regularly, and the normal mortals, normal chess players, they don't have time and energy to do the research as the good players, as the exceptional players. So they are trying to follow what the big ones are doing, with their games. So for this reason, it's understandable that when the open Spanish is coming back to be fashionable, quite a few players are taking it over, and they are pursuing something like this. So at this stage, it was still quite okay. But now white will try to play rook d1 and c4. For this reason, black was hurrying with knight c5, and after knight c5, rook d1, knight b3. Of course, we take with the a pawn, in this position. Of course, the other recapturing on b3 is possible as well, but it's not quite so, I would say respectable, because from the strategic point of view, it's much better to double the pawns on the b file with the help of a pawn. The rook on a1 is putting pressure against a6, and the pawn on the a2 is much less valuable than the pawn on the b file. So for two positional reasons, I mean, it makes more sense to recapture on b3 with the a pawn. In the meantime, the players have played one more move, and they have again the great disparity in the time consumption. White is creative. White is doing something that he probably never played in this form before, because he has only 48 minutes left. And black, the German player, Ermich, he has on the clock 1:26, which is no time consumption at all. I mean, it will be interesting to see if the imbalances that we see in this match will percolate also into the results of the matches or the games, because of course it's an element that plays a role. Despite all expectations, you have to take into account also the time consumption, because without time in some positions it's exceedingly difficult to play a proper move. The fourth game of the match is more positional, and here I would say that white is definitely happy with the outcome of the opening, because he managed to get the bishop pair, and black has too many elements on the light squares, so this must be better for white, even though it will definitely take time to prove it, to convert it into something tangible. But the question about who is better in this position is certainly not valid anymore. It must be white, and it's only a question of probably time and energy. What can he get out of it, since black is really vulnerable on the dark square? So I like this position very much for white. And I can see that here the disparity in time consumption is not so terrible, because black also needed some time. Here we have the match between Slovenia and Slovakia too, and well, these days we have to say chess is very concrete. Black is playing with his pawns on the king side like crazy, without castling. He is, trying to grab the bishop with the help of g5, h4, and now f6. So it won't be easy for white to prove that he has enough, counterplay, or he has enough, well, after f6 he will have to take on e4 and then queen e4, queen g6 and all that. Again, it's a question if both players know what they are doing. Lavrentic is playing a very sharp line, and well, certainly it's double-edged because it's either good or bad. This time I would say, well, there is no neutral, evaluation. It's quite possible that if he had analyzed it, but given the time consumption, Jablonitsky with white, a Slovak player, is playing more confidently, and well, he's burned only 15 minutes compared to 34 for black. So I would bet that probably black might have overreached himself, and it won't be easy to prove that everything is fine, everything is hunky-dory for black. I mean, this is promising to be a very interesting fight, in the near future. On the board number 2, we see something that is original. This must have, been born by knight g7 against Ruy Lopez against Spanish defense. Knight g7 is played by the player number 1 in Slovakia, Jerguš Pechač, who is 2600, and Patrick Števik is someone who is a great friend of our best player, and he's trying to emulate the ideas of his big brother, or of his big example. He would like to play as a Jerguš Pechač, and for this reason he believes it helps if he is trying to use the same opening ideas. That's why the very original knight g7, there were times when I would swear that knight g7 is either unimportant sideline or something very strange. But these days, with the help of computers, with the help of engines, you can try to revive any which line that is not really second rate, and this is exactly what Pechač is doing with knight g7. He is analyzing the openings to the great depth with the help of computer, and certainly if he is doing something, it might be reasonable to follow his example. I mean, of course, white, in order to refute the system, is playing a little bit extremely with h4, and well, now instead of taking on h5, black is grabbing the bishop or fighting against the bishop, and after eliminating the bishop on c4, which is the proverbial Spanish Ruy Lopez bishop, now black is playing c6, and well, I believe this was on the board before, in the analysis or something. I don't see advantage for white here, but of course the whole system is not easy to refute. And well, okay, according to the time consumption, I would say they both are in control, they know what they are doing. So I believe we are looking at a position that is reasonably well equal. Okay, in the next position from the match, from the board number 3, black seems to be doing fine, despite white centralization of all his pieces. The pawn structure is only slightly better for white. Black is hoping to play something like knight c4, soon. So I don't see any advantage that would be of note for white. I don't believe that this is a position that is promising white anything. Again, you can see the indicative, burning of time Turchan from Slovak team has used more time than his opponent, and his opponent is playing his moves, more confidently, more quickly, with better control. Of course, these days it's impossible to know everything, every line that can, arise on the board. So, very often, or, simply the understanding of the position is deeper on for black. So I would say, this is a position where white will unlikely get more than equality. After bishop c5, I see, this is probably equal position more or less. Okay, on the fourth game of the match, black has tried the usual, attack against the h2 with the help of queen a5, queen h5, and knight g4. And white, instead of playing h3, which would cost him dearly after knight e5, has played h4. And now it's a real problem, to decide, is the location of the queen on h5 a bonus or a real, misnomer? Black has now played h6, probably with the idea of trying g5 and attack on the king side, because white has good pieces. He's even ready for knight d5. I strongly suspect this should be better for white, but he will have to play forcefully, because if white is meek, it can be pretty nasty for him. For instance, he can't play f3 because very often queen c5 and knight f2, would cost him, dearly. It would cost some material, and so white has to be careful. I mean, it's quite possible that this is a venomous position, but the one-sided nature of the black's attack is probably a little bit too much. I'm not quite convinced that everything is hunky-dory for black. So my suspicion is white should be better in this position. Now we are coming to a big match between Czech Republic and Italy. I have mentioned Italy in my introduction, and well, Italy came with a very strong team. And it's not so easy for the Czech team that is doing so far very well under the leadership of Václav Finek, who is a very young player, but he's already 2500. He's one of the most promising players the Czech Republic has produced in last year or last few years. And the rest of the team is comprised also from very good players, well over 2400. So for the moment, Czech Republic is occupying the first spot in the tournament, and well, for the favorites, Italy came with the strongest team. So nominally speaking, Italy is the main candidate for the triumph in this competition. It will be a very tense match, very interesting to follow what will happen. So we see something like semi-Slav position where black is trying to tame down white's initiative with the help of exchange of the bishops on b2, which is dragging the queen a little bit away from the center and from the activities of the opponent. Moves like c5 can be unpleasant here, or knight e5. White is certainly slightly ahead, and with knight e5 he is trying to attack c6 and h7 at the same time. This may not be so pleasant for the black player, but definitely Finek is fully aware of what is going on, and he will try to solve the problem for him in a positive manner. So we will see. It's difficult to guess, but of course at the first glance, white is better. Son is higher rated. He's 2570. He's certainly a favorite in this direct encounter, and I would suspect that position is somewhat better for white. On the second board, we see the match or clash between Jan Vikog and Moroni Luka. Moroni is higher rated, and well, this is the reason why Italy is number one in the competition. We see the setup that is very well known in many types of openings, Sicilian openings, where white is ready to strike in the center and say on the king side. Black has to be careful, but black has this hedgehog position, this a6, b6, d6, e6, controlling all the squares with pawns on the fifth rank. And well, this is certainly promising, for the defense, but I would say position is approximately equal. Also, the time consumption is very similar on both sides. So, probably the players know what they are doing, in the sense, nobody is really in trouble. They are just trying to play exact moves, and that's why they both burn equal amount of time. On the board number 3, you see a Dutch setup. Dutch, it means, black has played f5 at some moment and put a knight on e4. The structure d5, e6, f5 has one drawback, and that's the weakness of the e5 square. And white has done, everything in his mind to be able to be in the position to exploit it, with the help of two knights and the bishop on f4. These positions were sneered at in the past, but it's not so easy, because say if the bishops are exchanged, on f4 and d6, black can play something like queen to a3, and a2 pawn will be quite vulnerable. So it's very difficult to say that white is better, because also the square c3 is vulnerable. I can always jump to knight c3. I would say this is quite a playable position for black. And well, as you see, again, the time control, or the time burning, is indicative. White has burned more time than black, and evidently it's obvious that black knows very well what he's doing in this position. Okay, so I would say practically equal. Here we have a position that is a double-edged sword, but definitely black should be more or less happy, because he has a bishop pair and also a better pawn structure. On the other hand, the bishop on c8 is not yet developed, and well, if white, if black can improve that, he might even be better, because b2 is a weak pawn. So I would say definitely fine for black, and it's a question if he can get more out of it than meets the eye. I would guess bishop d7 is the move to be looked at, or maybe he will try to improve the rook, from a8 via rook a5 or rook a6, rook d6, something like that. But to my understanding of chess, bishop d7 seems to be the right attitude. Okay, we will see. Of course, after bishop d7 there is knight e5, and again, black has more time than white. Mitza is not such a strong player, and well, he is a little bit unsure. And well, when he saw this position, he wanted to make sure that he has enough counterplay, because actually white is trying to equalize in this position. Okay, now there is a big match between France and Slovakia, number 1. And well, in this position, we can see black now took knight d5, knight c3. Obviously, white has to take with a pawn. And well, this bishop on b3 is quite a nasty beast, and also the pieces are a little bit more active than the pieces of the opponent. So it's quite possible that white has some pull, and also you see the black player is of course the lesser man in this match, because Bekhac is the highest rated probably in the tournament with 2600, and he's quite dangerous. He knows what he is doing, and well, if he gets a position where he can play actively, this might be quite unpleasant for the opponent. So, I see only a problem with rook e1 and a3 is hanging, but white is also able to recapture on e1 with a queen or some such, so he doesn't have to sacrifice the a3 pawn. I would give slight preference to white pieces or the white position here in this moment. But then again, don't take me too seriously, because I'm only looking fleetingly at a problem, and well, black might have something like bishop e6 equalizing, or getting the position that he might be content with. Difficult to judge, but certainly very interesting. And well, black is not so sure, because he is burning more time than white, distinctly more time. The second match, or second game of the match, is favorable for white. White has simply, bishop pair. In this position, it might still play a role, despite the fact that the position is quite close. On the other hand, the pawn structure is a little bit, interesting, double-edged. Black has a free pass pawn on the c4, and well, he is missing the dark square bishop. His knights might play a role of knight e6, knight g5, something like that. The players have burned, equal amount of time, so probably this is a position that is close enough, to equality. White should not be worse with his two bishop or bishop pair, and decent position of the pawn structure. Also, the time consumption is practically in parity. The third game of this match is interesting, because white is in Sicilian defense, trying to advance c4, c5. If he ever manages to get it in, like now after rook d1, the threat c5 is palpable, because after d takes c5, I can play d6 and win the piece for white. And then the rook c1 is coming, and c5 and knight c4 and so on. This might not be so pleasant for black, but okay, black is prepared to counter in the center with e4, bishop f6, knight e5 and so on. So, it's not like black is clearly suffering, because he has good pieces and he has a plan that is well known. He just has to execute it, quite well, in order to get enough counterplay to to make it fine for him. So again, I won't be able to tell what is it. The only scary factor here is that black has nearly 1 hour less than has burned 1 hour more than white. So definitely black is a lesser player with not such a high rating, and he's quite unsure how to evaluate the position, how to perform his counterplay in the best possible way. So probably this is an indication that white is better off, and he knows much more what he's doing in this position. The time consumption for black is a source of worry. Okay, the game number 4 in the match is interesting from the point of view that it's original. White has 7 pawns, black has also 7 pawns, but they are not symmetrical by any means. And well, it's still an opening position that is not only original, but is double-edged. And well, I'm not sure if white knights on f4 and f3 are compensating for the compactness of the black setup in the center. It's very well possible that black is already better in this position. Also, he's more experienced player, better player. And well, this time the time consumption is comparable enough. It's not so bad. So I would say, my feeling is, my gut feeling is, black is happy, but we will see, what to think about the position when few more moves are, played, and the position will clarify itself a little bit more. But I don't see a real problem for black here, fortunately. Okay, this is the whole setup, of the games played in the men's section. We have also the women's section, but I suggest we take a small break, and I will be with you in few minutes, enlightening you a little bit more on the situation in the women's tournament, where also the 10 teams are competing. So we have 20 games also in the women's section. Hi, this is Lubov Starčník, Grandmaster from Slovakia. I'm the captain of the two Slovak teams. I'm trying to fill the gap, in the studio from the competition that is called, the men and women competition. The cup played in, played in Slovakia. It's a competition that is called Mitropa Cup, with a great tradition. Already more than distinctly more than 30 times, the 10 teams from Central Europe are meeting at one of the states. It's rotating. Every country has an obligation to organize the competition, when the time comes, and when they are due. And well, the competition is played on the men's section and also the women's section. Women teams are very dynamic, with lots of young players, and well, even the players that don't have very high rating can play very good chess. We are talking about the match between Austria and Switzerland, by accident, or by not by accident, but intentionally. The drawing of lots at the very beginning of the competition was done equally for men and women, and women play the same teams as men, only in the women disguise. So if Austria is meeting Switzerland in the men's section, they do clash also in the women's section. Actually, the game from the round number 4 on the top board in this match is very interesting. It's a typical Catalan with d takes c4, and after d takes c4, queen c2, black is playing the most controversial, the most interesting move, b5. This used to have been considered, not only impossible, but like the move that is not good, or not playable. But these days it belongs to most dynamic and controversial continuations. The whole system develops very quickly, and obviously the ladies are well prepared, because as far as I'm informed, after a4, b4, knight d2, and knight d5, knight c4, c5, these days belongs to the main line. And black is trying to play in the style of semi-Slav. The pawn on b4 is both good and bad at the same time. It's certainly limiting the scope for the white knight on b1, to develop to c3 and to fight for the center. On the other hand, black is probably overreaching herself simply by playing c5 when other pieces are not yet playing. Okay, d takes c5 is also possible, but these days they try e4, knight b6, and now e5, when it is next to impossible to defend the rook on a8 other than knight d5, rook d1, knight d7. With each move, each player is trying to position the pieces to the best possible locations. Knight bishop b2, queen c7, knight d2, and now there is no waiting anymore. Black took on d4, bishop d4, rook c8, rook c1. So far so good. From what I know about the whole system, d6 is a big weakness, but on the other hand, like knight d4, knight d6 would be nasty, but on the other hand, black has a lot of pressure, and also the square c3 is reasonably weak, so I'm not sure if white has any advantage. Certainly, for ladies, there are semi-professionals typically. They play a very topical, very charged line. The time consumption is comparable, so I think this is an open fight. My estimate is the position is roughly equal, and chances for black are not to be sneered at. On the second board of the match, you see something that is much more flat, much more even. Most of the pieces, light pieces have disappeared. We only have opposite color bishops. Of course, opposite color bishops are a very dangerous proposition, especially if you are the victim of the attack of your opponent. And well, as far as I can see, black's bishop on f6 will be on e5 and then g6, f5 and so on. It's quite possible that black is hoping to have a slightly better position, but since there are, other than the opposite color bishops in a pure form, the other pieces are comparable. White has two rooks and queen, black has two rooks and the queen. I presume that this also might better out into something like equality, even though feeling wise I presume black is slightly better or has slightly better chances here. Again, the time consumption is very comparable, so I don't think that anybody was too surprised in this opening. On the board number 3, between Switzerland and Austria, we see a positional fight, proverbial square d5 in the Sicilian defense is very weak for black, and the bishop is there, the bishop is playing on both sides, and also making the movement of the knight less probable. Black just played bishop d8 in order to put it to b6 possibly, or after rook d1 maybe it's necessary to play rook c8 first and only then bishop b6, and then after f5 the bishop would have been perfect there. Again, a little bit difficult to estimate. My estimate is white is somewhat better because the backward pawn d6 is not a beauty, and it may very well be somewhat better for white, but difficult to judge. I don't see a real progress because this type of positions are well known in the meantime. Black has dynamics with f5. It's quite possible that this is okay, even though the time consumption of black is a little bit scary. White lady for Switzerland has burned only 11 minutes, and black is 1 full hour down, so there is a great disparity in time consumption in this game. On the board number 4, we see now after knight c6 a position. Well, h-pawn has disappeared, I don't even know, now I see how, queen g3 at some stage, here in the opening, there was, queen d3, queen g3, opposing the queen on c7, she had to take, and then, later on, one of the pawns disappeared with g4, g5, like this. Okay, this, from the very early part of the game, white is ready to play endgame. Typically endgames are good for black in Sicilian, but not all of them, necessarily speaking. Here we have the semi-open h-file, we have good pieces, and so-called Marozzi bind, pawn on c4, pawn on e4, making breaks like b5 and d5 less probable. So even in positions like this, white can play for advantage, and after knight c6, I believe it's still white who is trying for more than equality, also because the h-pawn is of a lesser value than the f-pawn. Otherwise the position is also from the point of pawns rather symmetrical, but here white can hope to have a better part of it, because the pawns, all the pawns from b file to g file are more valuable than the flank pawns a and h. In many endings, as you probably know, it's much more difficult to win, or simply impossible to win. Take for instance, you have a pawn on the a6 and the dark square bishop for white. Black king is on a8, and despite the fact that you have more, 4 pawns more, pawn and in the bishop 3 other pawns and some, you are not able to push the king away from the corner, and that's only because you can't push it from the other side. There is an edge of the board, so all the pawns apart from a and h pawn are full-blooded pawns. If you manage to trade the h pawn for the f pawn, so you have f pawn and the opponent has h pawn, that's an advantage in itself. But okay, I mean, I can't claim a huge advantage for white, but it's difficult to take with a pawn now because of knight a4 and with the idea of knight b6. So black probably has to take with a bishop, at this moment. Very interesting, but at least, for black, there is some consolation. The time management is okay, in this game. It's very comparable between white and black. Then we have the match Germany and Hungary on the women form, and okay, this is very exciting. This is of course semi-Slav, one of the lines that I even analyzed the game like this lately, because one of my students, Samir Sahidi, played something like this with white. That white is already a pawn down on h2. The pawn has disappeared, but his pieces are on the king side, hoping to do something. After e5, black played knight h7, and black player is a good lady, formerly I believe from Russia. Is now living in Germany and playing for Germany. She is a good player, and she knows what she is doing, even though I shouldn't jump to conclusions, because when I looked at the time consumption, it's not tragic for black, but certainly white knows more about the line. Black had to burn 1 hour so far, and we are in the position that it reminds me very much about deep analysis in this line. We had the move 18, which is rather deep, but I think this position or similar positions are still known. Okay, the problem with for black is bishop on b5, bishop on b7. They are not really participating, and also the bishop on b8 is obstructing the connection on the 8th rank and all that. This improves white chances to find compensation for the missing pawn. So it's an open fight. I would presume bishop e7, bishop d6 will be the best line, or best continuation here, but who am I to judge? I'm not so deep into this line, but I certainly know how it is arising. I have seen something similar lately. Okay, on the board number 2 in Germany, Hungary, we have a more peaceful setup. This is a Queen's Gambit exchange on d5, which has been modernized in these days. This is a very, I would say, conservative approach from the black point of view, because black never played b5, a5 and counterplay on the queen side. All the pieces are concentrated on the king side, but white has moves like g4 now, and then protection of the e3 pawn. My presumption is white is simply better, but I am not able to really guarantee it. There is some risk involved. Even in that line, white would definitely like to benefit from the better bishop on d3, and then bishop on e6 is more constrained. There are too many pawns for black on the light squares, 5 out of 7, which makes the bishop on e6 to be a slightly second-rate piece. So, my estimate is here white is somewhat better in this position. Okay, then board number 3. Okay, exciting, rook b1. We have a position where white, for some reason, sacrificed exchange. Okay, out of necessity. When we look a little bit here, after d5, bishop c5, knight f2, rook f2, bishop f2. White was fully aware, white player was fully aware that she will be playing without the exchange. Now queen e1. Obviously, now black is slightly in danger because knight on e4 is a very good piece, and well, there is a potential attack on the king side. White will try to attack black king, and yes, black has more material, and and she has a extra rook in the sense, exchange. But first of all, you need a position where you can show it, when you can prove that you are fine, that you have a better position than the opponent, or better position that you can use the rook to the benefit. So this is a position that is for black not so easy, in some sense, quite dangerous. Maybe she has to play something like b5 and try to, but after b5 I see knight d6 and well, knight b7, then God knows, not easy for black, because I see that black might have on paper extra pawn in the rook against knight and the pawn. But on the other hand, neither, not a single of the pieces for black is playing properly. So this might be quite dangerous, for black, for the black player. Okay, on the board number 4, we have a peaceful setup, more or less peaceful. I call it geometrical chess. No knights, all the knights have disappeared. You only have the pieces that are long-ranging. Long-ranging pieces are obviously a rook, bishop, and the queen as the combination of the rook and the bishop. And when you look at the position, the spice of the chess game, the knights, they are completely missing. So this is a little bit different chess than you are used to. You have to try to enable your pieces to play, to the maximum effect. Castling, c5. You need files, you need diagonals, you need open files for the rooks and so on. So whoever will play more efficiently with his pieces will be more successful. And the special feat of the pieces, long-ranging pieces, is that they are difficult to improve. Once you have a bishop on e4, where do you put it? You can put it on g2, obviously, and try to take on e2, rook g1, bishop b4, rook g7, bishop g6. That's things like this are possible, but we will see what happens. I'm sort of surprised that white now played bishop b2, because I see the problem after bishop g2. But okay, I may not, I may miss something, I may misunderstand, difficult to judge if this is good, because white still has then, after bishop g6, bishop e5, trying to take on g6. Well, God knows, difficult to judge. Probably bishop g2 is not so strong, otherwise white would not play bishop e2 in the first place. Okay, there is something that happens here, the draw, and well, sometimes you have the draw like this, knight g4. Well, this is interesting. Knight g4 in this position is actually a big scandal, because black has only one piece in play. Okay, actually two, because the queen on d8 is developed, but many people just don't perceive it that way, or they don't understand. So let's say black has one piece, white has 3 pieces. Despite that, in the move number 6, black is taking the piece and putting it to g4, the knight on to g4. There is only one justification for this, and well, the justification is that you attack the piece that is too valuable. Simply, white is not able to ignore the attack against the bishop on e3, because all the other pieces are controlling light squares. Pawn on e4, knight on c3, knight on d4, queen on d1, bishop f1. All of these pieces are controlling light squares. So if you would play knight g4, attacking the piece that is controlling light square, it wouldn't hurt at all. And the only piece currently rectifying, rebalancing the position, is the bishop on e3, and it has the value of gold. So after knight g4, the only real way to continue is to play bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, g5, and so on. Or go back, and after knight f6 there is no better move, play something else, not bishop e3. But I mean, here we have a situation where both players are repeating bishop c1, knight f6, bishop e3. Once you have it for the third time on the board, you can even outsmart the rule that is valid in this Mitropa Cup. The rule is Sofia rule, first 30 moves, you can't even offer draw, you can't agree to draw, you can only force draw by repetition of the move. So, this is what happens. So it's not interesting, it's only, remarkable that, the top board in the match, Slovenia, Croatia is, finishing like this. Probably the ladies know each other and they didn't have the willingness to fight. Okay, this is interesting because white has extra pawn and less of a position, or white doesn't have the position in the sense that, okay, after queen c4 the bishop on c5 is hanging, but black, for the missing pawn, has advantage in development. Some files, some open files, d3 pawn is weak and all that. But since the time consumption on both sides is approximately equal, it's probably fine for white, even though it makes a little bit risky impression, because if there is any clash on the board, if something happens, white will not be happy because the level of preparedness is not high. Now, king on e1 is not a real problem unless there is a real fight on the board, but it can arise at any moment. So I am not quite sure that white is doing great, but it's probably okay. My estimate is if it is fine, then the position is equal. Okay, on the board number 3, Slovenia, Croatia, we have something interesting. It was a center. There is a gambit. In the old days, gambits were not so rare. These days you can play gambits, but people know how to react. I would say one of the reactions is d5, but then black may enter the position that she was not asking for and all that. So black took on c3, knight c3, bishop b4. You need some good nerves, to play like this. After bishop c4, there is a threat of bishop f7 and queen b3, but bishop on b4 is protected. I would say knight e7 or some such, but black took on c3. That must be a chess theory. And now h6, taming down the opponent. h6 is a multifaceted move because, say, after queen b3 I can play something like queen f6 or queen e7 threatening knight a5. It's not easy to punish black for the way she plays. She has an extra pawn, but lacking development, d6, and now e5. Of course, there is a rule, very strict rule. If you are ahead in development, you want to jump on your opponent and create a problem, because the preparedness of your opponent for the conflict is quite miserable. It's not possible to take on e5 because then bishop f7 is coming, king e7, bishop a3. So after knight e5, knight e5, d takes e5, bishop f7, it's trivially won for white. So black needs something better. Of course, it's not about the material, it's about the development. So bishop e6 should tame down any activity of white. And after this, f takes e6, double threat, queen b3, attacking b7 and e6. Of course, black doesn't necessarily want to play queen c8, because then I can take on d6, rook e1, bishop a3, rook d1. White will be very quick with his attack, or with her attack. That's why black is doing more conservative d5, queen b7, knight e7. As usual, you have already seen in this game, when there is a crisis, you try to develop. And after bishop a3, castling. Okay, so far so good. I mean, it goes so far. If it's black's position, black may even consider something like rook f3. Okay, and then knight e5 or some, I mean, well, okay, positions like this. So, I mean, ideas like this. If black survives, it might be okay because the bishop on a3 is a wrong colored bishop. White has quite a few pawns on the dark squares. 3 out of 5 of 6. Is it like four out of 6 on the dark squares, which diminishes the value of the bishop on a3. So this might as well be perfectly fine for the black player. Okay, black can play queen d7, then rook b8, and so on. So it should not be critical for black, but it took some sensible play and sensible decisions. The problem for black is black has a little bit less time, or less, not enough time, because we are only at the move 13. That's not very encouraging. Okay, and on the fourth board of the same match, we see, black is actively defending with a queen on d5, and after h6, it's quite possible that it's actually white who is in trouble. I mean, she has to play something like knight h3, and the knight is not really very good, and I can even play queen e4, queen f5, or king h7, I don't know. I mean, it shouldn't be so bad. Also, the bishop on d2 is virtually hanging, so, any other move is probably wrong. So I would say, this is quite a fair position for black, because due to the queen on d5 and, good pieces currently. I mean, that's my estimate. Now the Czech Republic against Italy. Czech Republic against Italy, it's a big match, because both teams are belonging to the better teams in the competition, and the ladies are burning time, especially Vorek Joanna, who plays for Czech Republic for some time already, and she is playing slow. I mean, I wouldn't say bad, definitely not bad, even though the knight on e5 is a little bit scary, but certainly having only 22 minutes, plus increment after the move number 16 is not very pleasant. So, I mean, in this respect, white has undeniable advantage, not only in rating or maybe somewhat in the position, but also in time, because time will play the role when the going gets tough. Now on the second board of the match, black is playing very interesting chess. I mean, she wants to play knight c4, she wants to attack on the queen side. That's not very pleasant, even though for the moment we are pawn down, but that's not so critical. I mean, it's more concerning that black is not fully developed, or developed as she should be. But okay, I mean, sometimes it happens. If there is no real problem, the threat of knight c4 is really unpleasant. Say after b3, I play bishop c5, and it should be a good position for black. Zimina is this very experienced player. And Rybachkova, for Czech Republic, is probably, sweating now. I mean, not quite sure, how to handle the dangerous situation in the center or on the queen side. I would bet a little bit more on the black's chances. Okay, on the board number 3. We have a situation, knight a5. I mean, this is not much has happened, and the players are fighting for the good spots for the pieces. Queen a4 is bishop d7, queen c2, knight b4, queen d1, probably the most appropriate, but it looks normal. I mean, quite acceptable for black. Even more so that experienced lady Sedina. She's one of the oldest, players in the competition, She has more experience, but of course these days, black can play anything, and it seems to me that black is trying, to solve the problems of the position. Say after queen d1, maybe knight b6 and c4 is hanging. That's not very pleasant. Okay, I'm not claiming white has problems, but certainly, I mean, she has enough problems to burn, 1 hour so far, even though knight a5 is only move number 11 on the board. I mean, that's not very good. Okay, then uh, the game number 4, board number 4 in the match. This seems to be more timid. The knights were exchanged on h5. Black has a normal position, I mean, there might be a problem after bishop b3, I mean, d5, how to, handle the position where you try to control the center, maybe d takes e4, and then, bishop e6 or f6, bishop e6, and so on. Should be okay for black, but, white has a more, I would say, compact position, and well, it might be somewhat unpleasant for black players. Okay, then we have France against Slovakia, and here white is at the driving wheel because black is unable to take on d4, and rook on a7 is hanging. The tactics is working for white, also. Okay, there is a problem that of course white is playing with initiative, but I have just noticed that black is an extra exchange, so the situation is not so simple. It might be, in the best of cases, I can imagine that this might be equal if white gets enough compensation in initiative. Okay, rook a7, knight e4, fine. Rook a5, rook a8, and then castling, it shouldn't be such a big problem for black, but a black player has little time, Bokničková for Slovakia on the first board is playing, very quickly. I mean, she has only burned 30 minutes till the move 19. Okay, I'm not saying it's great, but it's certainly better than black. Black lady with black pieces has only 22 minutes plus increment, so I mean, this is a bit open, even though black should be fine, but it's not so easy to play under attack. Now we have a position knight c5. This is very sharp, but could easily be quite good for white, because the extra pawn on e6 is not just extra pawn, it's also something. Okay, I mean, well, maybe after queen c4 there is bishop e6, bishop e6, rook f1, queen d1, then knight d3. I mean, unless black has something very concrete, it will be better for white, but as I said, queen c4, I have a feeling that bishop e6 should be working, for black, and then everything is fine, then everything is hunky-dory. Very interesting, and well, okay, at least more balanced in the sense of time consumption for both players. So I bet this is equal more or less, or black is not without chances. On the board number 3, we see something sharp, reasonably sharp. White didn't even sacrifice anything. After g4, bishop h4, she has the chance to sacrifice something like e6 or take on f5. And as I said, e6, I mean, the moment I said it, it's on the board, and this is not so very pleasant, because after bishop e1 there is e takes d7 and only then taking on e1. I mean, this is very smelly, this is very dangerous for black. I would say most likely quite critical, and well, the black player will not be very happy after f takes e6, knight e6. White should be more or less winning. I mean, here the disparity in time consumption is really outrageous. White has still 1 hour, and then black is sinking after move number 17 towards 16 16 minutes for the rest of the moves. That's not very good. Okay, and on the board number 4 of the match with France, Slovakia is doing, so-so with black. I mean, the position is nominally equal, but white has 2 bishops, and well, for this reason, somewhat better chances. But most likely the position will better out to some form of equality, because it's very difficult. The position is too symmetrical from the point of pawns, and well, my bet is this will be at some moment a draw. The only concern is that again, black has very little time, very, like, 20 minutes, so it's not just, but we are dealing with the move number 26, not 16 or something, and the position is not sharp. It should be enough for black to handle the position. I want to thank you very much. I will make a break, and we will continue with the men competition, if possible, later. few minutes ago we have finished, commenting on the games of the ladies. In the meantime, from the beginning of the round, we have 2.5 hours, even though the beaming of the games is delayed for 15 minutes. Now the games are entering a very interesting, hot stage, and I hope we'll be able to see something very interesting. In the match between Austria and Switzerland, we have seen interesting opening that white after knight c3, knight f6. I was sort of pondering, in the first part of my transmission or annotation. I was pondering what will happen in the center. After a long thing, white decided to play d5, and to make it more simple, after a knight e5, knight e5, d takes e5. This structure is not necessarily to white's advantage, because the black bishop is ideally on the b6. Okay, after a few more moves, we have reached this position where black bishop is on d4 after a4, a5, and black has all the pieces developed, with the exception of the rook on f8, and white still needs to place somewhere the bishop from c1 and the rook from f1. I would say the position is around equal, even though it's highly charged and anything is open. On the board number 2, we see something interesting. Is white even theoretically able to do something here to endanger opponent, because black has a real counterplay despite the pass pawn on the a file. White is unable to play a5. Black will simply take. Also, the pawn on e4 is about to disappear. The only thing that might really cause trouble is like rook d1, rook d8, with the idea of rook h8. This is probably what's in the cards, and after rook d1, black will have to find out how to extricate itself from the attack of the concentrated white pieces, something like g6. I mean, it might still be better for white, but unless rook d1 and rook d7, rook d8 is working, white will have nothing much. After rook d1, even bishop e7 is possible. Okay, rook a7, not so easy, but we will see. This is still highly charged. On the board number 3, we see something unpleasant for white. I would say white has no claim to fame. On the contrary, black pieces are more active, concentrated against the king side, and also bishop on c6 is much better beast than bishop on f1. So my estimate is that the position is reasonably critical for white, and black should be able to prevail here. And on the board number 4, after h4, we have the situation that is pretty proverbial. Black has 2 bishops as a compensation for a missing pawn. Well, it is a virtual compensation, of course. If black should give up the bishop, he may lose the premium that is connected with the bishop pair, and the position may very well be, according to computer evaluation, about equal. Black has excellent pieces, and in order to prove that white extra pawn amounts to anything, it would require some effort, not easy. So in my estimate, this is also around equal position. Then we have the match Germany against Hungary, and we can see that a pawn on d4 that I was discussing in the first part of my beaming of my session is still going strong. And not only that, black is trying to play actively against white, And okay, the position is fair, but now we have a problem because after b takes c4 there is no way to recapture. If I do it with a d pawn, then there is d3. If I do it with a b pawn, then the rook on b1 is hanging. And after bishop d2, at least we have a chance to play b takes c4, b takes c4, because now the rook on b1 is protected with the rook on f1. I mean, to my eyes, black has a pleasant position, but okay, I mean, systematically speaking, might be dangerous. It's all about the strength and the potential of the d4 pawn. I would say also around equality. Then the second board of the match, Germany-Hungary, and now the position is more clarified. Black has 6 pawns, white has 6 pawns. We have, all the knights have disappeared. We are dealing with geometrical chess, and well, okay, unless white can somehow get e3, e4 in, he won't be able to claim any advantage. To my eyes, this is slightly better because white has better pawns, but also h4 is a burden. H4 pawn needs protection, so it's quite possible that also this position is equal, even though white has distinctly better time, and black has to worry because he still has to make 13 moves on 13 minutes plus increment. Okay, then we have the position that is very charged, knight d4, and these type of positions are not easy to evaluate because obviously black has something. It means 2 bishops, also the extra pawn on the queen side, but he should not be too optimistic because it might not be sufficient in the sense white wants to take on e6 and then take on d8, so a4 after knight e6, okay, maybe only connected with rook d1, and then f takes e6 is possible. Okay, a4 is the most desirable move. Okay, in this respect, if it's working, if it is like working proposition, then maybe everything is fine. But no, I don't know. I don't know. It's either very good for black, or white has some way of showing that the whole story is not so simple. But pass pawn is a pass pawn. I mean, especially if you have a bishop on f8, even a3 pass pawn is very dangerous. Then you are missing only 2 steps, towards a1. So white didn't manage to get anywhere with his play. So here the position should be better. And when white takes into account the fact that white has very little time, only 5 minutes for the 18 moves. I believe black is at the driving wheel here. Much better. Okay, that's the fourth. That's the third board, and then we have the fourth board of the match, Germany-Hungary, and we have been musing about the dark square bishop. Now we have only a traces of the former advantage. This might be nice and pleasant, but it's difficult to see how we can make any progress. Okay, I would say this position is roughly equal, unless white manages to open up the position against the black king on d6, but I don't see how. This should be fine. Even more so that both players have equal time on the clock. Now the match, Slovenia-Slovakia, very interesting because white has a rook and the 2 pawns for the 2 bishops, which is very dangerous in the sense that 2 bishops have the value of 7 in my eyes, and the rook and the 2 pawns have the value of 7 as well. But since this position also has the features of the middle game, I mean, we have to say that it's more dangerous for white than for black. So in my understanding, black has managed to get a good position, and I mean not only good position, but he obtained better chances. The opening was interesting, but now as far as I can see, okay. I mean there was some. Oh, that this was this bishop e4, f takes e. I mean, this we have predicted, f6 in the critical moment after h4, bishop e5. We saw this position, and then we are musing about f6, bishop e4. White has to sacrifice the piece, and position is not so easy, and it's quite dangerous. And well, now after queen f6, knight h7, rook h7, queen h7, e takes d4. And then queen e7, bishop e7. Okay, it went like this, and black definitely knew what he's doing. Okay, for the moment we have the position that we have been looking at. This must be definitely better for black, after bishop d7. Okay, then we have the game from the second board, where black is in some trouble. 7 pawns against 7 pawns. Yes, and the rook on e7, that makes all the difference, and a pawn on h6. This should not be very pleasant. I mean, if black is very lucky, he might be able to not only resist, but maybe save the game, but definitely white has nothing to fear, and he is better. So this is clearly better for white. From a medium-term prospects, better. Here we have a position where this is what we discussed, where I was unhappy for the white player, because I mean there was this we saw the position of the bishop c5, and then queen d1, rook d1, rook e8, bishop c5 here, knight c4. And white is actually better, but white is happy to make the equal call after trading all the pieces, all the pawns, on the rook a2, with c5, rook a2. Since rook d8 is not leading to mate or anything, the position is actually equal. So I mean we should be content and happy with the draw, because this. It's not only symmetrical, but black and white have the same type of pieces, and even the same type of bishops. So there is not much variety here, not much to fight for. Okay, the fourth game of the fourth board of the match is queen e6. A bit of a problem for black. He can't really go king h7. And bishop e4 is a problem. So taking on e6, and well, then it's very difficult to get the pawn. And also, okay, d takes e6. Black has an extra pawn, but white has 2 bishops. The activity on the light squares, I would say, it's difficult to imagine that white is not better in this position, but how much better is not easy to predict. Bishop d4. Okay, black is playing very quickly, not afraid of bishop b7. Interesting, because then he believes there will be some counterplay on the other side of the board. Rook f8, and then king h8, rook g8. We will see. We will see, but I mean, to my understanding, this is a better position for white. Okay, I mean, we have a position from Sonis Francisco Finek, I mean, Czech Republic, Italy. Black has managed to put his house in order, but at a cost, because strategic wise, he is suffering. He is being squeezed, and white definitely has better chances in this position. How bad is the position for black, I'm not able to say. And despite the king on f1 that can go to g1, black doesn't have very good prospects. Maybe after f6, g6 is very weak, the whole king side. no counterplay for black players. So this is not easy for black. I am afraid that Finek might be meeting his real match. His challenger. On the second board, we see very typical Sicilian position. White is ready to strike with f5, e5 somehow. Black is ready to counter, for the counterplay on the along this diagonal, also in the center. So the position is, open. Maybe knight f2, knight g4, something. But we will see what happens, because here it's very difficult to predict. Everything is in the future, and well, the time may also play some role, because black has a less amount of time. Both players will be potentially in time trouble. Okay, then we have the position Brunello-Noyek. Remarkably, white has sacrificed, the pawn, or sacrifice. The pawn is gone somewhere, and on a3, queen a3, queen d6, now knight d7. Well, definitely this shouldn't be a problem for white after queen c7, I guess. Queen c7, rook c7, knight e5, even rook b7, and then, okay, or d takes e5, and rook b8, rook e7. To my eyes, white has no problems. He has solved it in a satisfactory manner. The only problem is the time, because at the move number 22, to have only 5 minutes left, of course, plus increment 30 seconds, per each move, it's not very satisfactory. I would be a little bit worried, for white player, even though his position seems to be doing fine. On the fourth board of the same match, we can see Mitza gets a real counterplay on the d7, and after king g2, of course, he was with the king on g1. There was a threat of rook g4 and rook f1. Now black can play something like rook g4, rook f4, king g2 back, and so on. He may try to survive, the whole ordeal. Black definitely has at least perpetual check, I would say. That's my estimate here. We'll see. We'll see what happens, because okay, even king h3, rook g4, king h3, rook h4, king g3, and then there is danger involved. Danger. I wouldn't be quite content, quite happy, but black shouldn't be, worried here, and also he has much better time than white. Okay, the last match that we will be looking at is Slovakia against France, and here we have a situation where after knight d6, black should be getting his material back. Interesting. That is even possible. Rook b5, bishop d4, knight d4, and now knight d6. Being a piece down and then doing tricks like this is very interesting. It's fine. White shouldn't probably be worried or be in trouble, but it's not easy. It's not easy. I can see ideas like queen b3. Okay, there is queen rook e1 and king h2, queen d4, which is unpleasant. So maybe a little bit better. I would love to play rook b8 in some form, but maybe it's not quite possible. And if we take on d6, queen d6, there is rook e1. Black is doing great, with his counterplay, knight d6, but Pekhac has a lot of time. Maybe there is something, I fail to see it, it fails to materialize. It might be even something like rook a5. knight c4. I don't know. I mean, well, it's not obvious, how white should extricate himself in this position, because the rook on b5 is hanging, and that's not very pleasant, of course. We don't like it very much. So in b3, queen d4, bishop d6, now check, check. Not nice, not nice for white, and I mean, it's a very tricky situation. I mean, difficult to estimate for me. I mean, it shouldn't be worse for white, hopefully, but he will have to find a way to get out of the problem. Now black is even trying to play this, for win possibly, but not really realistically, because it's very difficult to make progress. White position is partly impenetrable, and okay, I mean, after bishop d3, I still believe this is more or less, equal position, because the d5 pawn is weak, and it's difficult to make progress for black. The move of the round, the board number 3. I mean, we have seen the position that is quite dangerous for black due to c4, c5, which was never played, obviously. White somehow managed to get the extra pawn, and with the pawn on a7, the position should be, in higher sense, winning. But you have to prove it. You have to somehow, bring the chips home, and well, but with a pawn, extra pawn on a7, this is definitely, and also better time. This is definitely a winning position. There is no other way to see it. Bishop a6, queen d2. I mean, there is also knight e5. I believe this must be better for black, but also the knight from d4 is trying to jump somewhere, from d4. So black has to do something. I don't know if there is a move. Queen c7 is rook c1, queen b8 is knight c6. I mean, it's not easy to locate the queen, probably queen b7 after all, and threatening the pawn on e5. Then white will have to play knight f3. Probably there is something there, like knight b6 or some such, or rook c8. But okay, very interesting position. Definitely this should be fine for black. I mean, the gut feeling is telling me that black is not suffering despite the absence of the pawn, but he is better developed. White can only castle a short way. That's not very good. So probably, to my estimate, it's queen b7 all right, because I don't like the fact that the queen can be attacked after knight e6 or some such. Black has to deal with it. I can't imagine there is other solution than moving the queen away. Okay, I want to thank you very much. For a while we have managed to have a look at the situation after the practically 3 hours of play. Okay, with a delay of 15 minutes, we don't have clear 3 hours, but next time when we will be looking at the games of men's section, it will be very exciting, because in time travel, in before the time control, the positions are typically highly charged, and when you take into account the element of time, it is really interesting, the most interesting part of the games typically. Thank you very much. welcome back. I am Vtáčnik, Grandmaster Vtáčnik. I played for Slovakia for some time, many Olympiads and all that. Now, due to the age, I am more a captain of the two Slovak teams at a competition called Mitropa Cup, played in Trenčín in Slovakia. We have been covering in first sessions, the opening stage of the men and women competition. Now, after 3 hours of play, we are turning back to the women competition. We are dealing with a board number 1 between Switzerland and Austria, and well, this might well be the game of the round, because the ladies are competing in a very prestigious and I would say critical opening discussion, opening match. They are both very well informed, but now of course, when you are out of the book, you have to rely on your own understanding and intuition, calculation, and all that. And both Manko and Froevis, they have equal amount of time for the rest of the game, which is reaching critical stage. Move 21, still 19 moves to make before we will reach, or they will reach the stage where there is a time control. Bishop g2 was played. We will see what happens. I can't really predict this one, but definitely black is playing a very charged line, and white doesn't have it easy to prove that advantage of the first move. Okay, the second board is something that we have been witnessing, opposite color bishops, and potentially, attacked by one or the other player. After queen a7, I still believe the position is, more or less equal, and say after queen b6 check, rook b6, I can't imagine any other outcome than drawish outcome for the game. So this is reasonably easy or simple. I mean, much more complicated is the fight here, where white has a huge advantage, not only in position, that's my estimate, a reasonable advantage in the position, and also on the clock. I mean, when you consider 31 minutes compared to 7, and we are at a move 28, okay, still 12 moves to go. I mean, I am a little bit concerned about black player against a black lady. So here the favorite is clearly white player with ideal bishop on d5. It's a blockading bishop, and bishop is really strong, fighting on both flanks, and the knight on d8 and bishop c7 are way too modest pieces, to be satisfactory for black. So I mean, black should be not only worried, but should be concerned about what will happen in next few moves. And well, I mean, the black player certainly doesn't know how to handle it, because she is drifting towards the real crisis on the clock. Okay, I mean, bishop e5, we see 0-0, like, the time has run out. After bishop e5, the position is, okay, should be more or less, equal, but, not quite equal, because we have d3, and after d3, bishop b2. Okay, I mean, I can handle it, I mean, black has an extra pawn after bishop b5, rook e5, rook b3, but that might be manageable after rook d5, and then king is coming closer to the pawn. White is still having chances, for equality, or equality, saving the game. I mean, it's not completely equal, but saving the game. Okay, now we have the match Germany against Hungary, and interestingly enough, the bishop from b7 has disappeared. White has two bishops. Still, she's missing the pawn. But on the other hand, the prospects on the king's side are reasonable, since we have all the pieces pointing to the king's side. So this should be, more or less fine. But how exactly, to get there? Because after a5, the last move by black wants to play rook a7. So say after knight c5, rook a7. I would like to play e6 or f. I mean, it should be possible to get, somewhere. Like knight c5, e6 is a real proposition, because then the g6 is, falling apart and all that. Not easy. I mean, after e6 it would have to be necessary to play f5, but white might even take and all that. Black pieces are not great. I would say after knight c5, white has better prospects in this position. Okay, that's the first board of the match, Germany, Hungary. On the second board, we see some progress. G4 that I was announcing when we first saw the position from the opening was indeed played, but black in the meantime managed to create a counterplay on the queen side. I'm not saying sufficient. I would be a little bit worried about g5 and then f4 and f5 for white, but okay, pawn on h3 is also hanging, so making progress for white is not so easy. Should be possible, after rook e1. I mean, my estimate is, kingside attack of white is more dangerous than the counterattack of black on the queen side. But we will see. Both players, both ladies, have a critical amount of time, but at least the time consumption is comparable. So like this. On the third board, we have seen the position. When we looked last time, where white had one pawn for exchange, sacrifice exchange, but in the meantime it's even more promising, because I'm counting 7 for white and 5 for black, so one extra pawn, and also the bishops that are absolutely ideal, bishop d4, bishop d3. I mean, they are complementing each other. The bishops have the nature that they naturally coordinate their activities together. So my estimate is this should be better position for white, and not only better, but close to winning, because I can activate the rook and so on. I mean, it seems to me that black didn't find the way to oppose the pressure of the opponent, and here I would, if I had to, I would bet on the white lady. I mean, okay, and board number 4 in the match, Germany-Hungary. We see something that is interesting, the queen, solitary queen on c7, trying to do something, and white has extra pawn, but the position is to some degree maybe even dangerous, but it's a moot point. I can even take bishop e6, bishop d5. I mean, there are ways to play this, and I mean, white is definitely not worse. I would say white is better, and because the central position of black pieces and pawns is a little bit shaky. But after rook e1, I'm threatening rook e4. Obviously, but it's black's move. I mean, at least black can improve the position with the next move. I would bet on white here. Then we have the game, that we have mentioned, knight g4. This is the only one that is, finished so far. In the match, Slovenia, Croatia, we see this position. Okay, a little bit dangerous. C takes b6. Okay, the saving grace for black is knight d6 is not possible because of queen e1. and it won't be easy to solve. You can play f3 or some such, but I mean, even then, after knight d6, black can take on e1. So, but I mean, we can't live with a back rank problem of this magnitude. So I think something like h3 or f3 will be necessary for white. I don't see advantage for white, but I mean, she can hope, but not really. Okay, black doesn't have enough pieces for protecting the king, protection of the king's side, so in this respect it's a little bit dangerous, but okay, I mean, estimate is maybe somewhat better for white. Okay, then we have game number 3 in the match, and I have been praising black for a rational approach to the problems of the opening, and it seems to me black is doing, I mean, simply fine. No danger of losing, no danger of falling behind. Black can actually look into prospects for herself, like quite not promising, certainly not really bad or anything. So I mean, I don't know, after king h2 it won't be so easy to find counterplay, but something like queen f8, attacking f2, hoping queen f5, and so on. I mean, black position is perfectly fine. So I mean, black is doing great. And in the last game, we saw the moment when g6 was a problem. We are past that, and well, now we see black has 2 extra pawns, attacking position, bishop that can take on e5, and a very modest knight on f2. The chance is, if white can somehow manage to take on h5. I mean, here we are talking about the combination. Black has played rook f4, queen f4, after queen d8, c1 rook is hanging, after rook d1 we have queen d1, or maybe even rook f3, queen d1, knight d1, rook f3, and well, the knight is very bad there. Okay, I mean, the rook is hanging on d8, so it will be necessary to play after rook d1 simply rook f3, after queen d8 queen f2, after rook d4 rook d4, and black is better due to the fact that she has a very good control in the position with 2 rooks and all that, and 2 extra pawns. So I mean, it should be fine for black, even though okay, and well, white has less time and so on. So obviously the lady with the black pieces, Aydinic, is in a full control. Okay, now the typical problem, Vorek Johanna is playing quite slowly, but now I mean, it doesn't play such a big role because she managed to implant the knight on e4, and that's a very unpleasant piece, for the opponent. And Brunello Marina is a high favorite, in the whole competition, one of the highest rated player. I mean, she will find it very difficult now to penetrate, towards the black position. So it seems to me, black is out of the woods, and well, she can look, with optimism in the future, towards the future, even though making progress with black is also not so easy. Probably rook g8, g5, and some such, but also connected with some risk. We will see. I mean, for the moment the position is more or less equal. In the second board of the match, Italy, Czech Republic, we see some disarray. Bishop h6, this must be excellent for black. I see 6 pawns against 5 pawns. The knight from a4 has to go back, and black lady can castle or something like that, and she will definitely be reasonably safe on the king's side, and well, she will then try to attack on the other side of the board. So I believe this is way better for black. Also, Zimina has 3 times as much time, even though she doesn't have enough. She has only 15 minutes against 5 minutes for white. Still, it's a huge bonus, if you have enough time in the sharp position. So, I would bet on black, and this time heavily so. Okay, there is another position after rook c8. We can take on d1, we can take on c8, which is, in both cases there is a problem with the d pawn, because if I take on c8, rook d2, bishop goes, and then d6. If I take on d1, rook f8, and then d6, I mean d7 is not so dangerous then, so probably it should be bishop d1 as a better proposition. But who am I to judge? Not so easy to judge, because there is some b4, knight b7, knight c6. Now white should not be worse, maybe even better, but it would be really sweet to use the d pawn for gaining advantage for white. This might not be possible, but my feeling is bishop d1 is a better proposition, even though after bishop d1, rook c1 is possible, bishop h5, d6 anyway. So, I can't really be a judge here. Difficult for me. Maybe rook c8, rook d2, bishop b5, after d6, f6, and so on, just to fight against, the fast pawn, So rook c8, in the end of the day, it's rook c8, all right. She took on d1. I'm probably missing rook c1. Rook c1 might be ugly. Okay, never mind, we will see what Sedina makes out of it. In the game number 4 of the match, we see something very interesting. This is like proverbially uneven. Black has 7 pawns, white has 5, but the central pawns d4 and e4, they seem to be very dangerous. And well, typically when you have something like this, you have to be very careful, because it might be greatly beneficial for the opponent. The pawns, they have their own solves and dynamics, and these dynamics, when they start running, they are very difficult to stop. Rook e5 is an obvious move, and now I'm trying to slow down progress of black pieces. Rook d8, d3, d2, knight d5, knight b4, knight d3, something like that. It won't be pretty. This is not a position where white is happy. King f7, fine. Fighting against rook e7. This is my suspicion is the position is offering better prospects for black, simply because the black lady is having potential, and her pieces are coordinated well with the pawn structure. And white rooks, they find it difficult to prove how valuable they are, their value. You need to play with pieces. It's not only nominally speaking, you can have more than the opponent, but if your pieces are not utilized, it's actually less, because there is one problem in chess, serious problem, unresolved. We don't know how to assign value to the pieces that are not really playing. Nobody has ever attempted to make a system that would, rook on a8 is not playing, or rook on h8, in the opening for black. And well, if you never use the rook, you have practically played without the rook in the whole game. But assigning value to the rook on a8 is a slight mystery. She's definitely not a full-blooded rook. You have to for the games that are still, manageable. Okay, this is probably the most interesting part of the round because the games are reaching the critical stage, around move 40. Due to the delay of the transmission, we are seeing the games after three and three and three quarters of an hour, so not quite at the end of the story. But we can say that the positions are highly charged. Typically the players don't have enough time, and if you play on seconds, it's not very good. Like White managed to play the move with still seconds. Like 6 seconds on the clock. And well, Black has the same predicament, so probably c2 or some such. I'm not sure. What is the best move now, but this is very difficult to manage. On the with the time constraint. Of this type. So I mean, it's not easy, not pleasant, and nominally speaking. People should try to avoid situations like this because it's not only unpleasant, but this is something that might be bad. Like after rook b1, the position is equal. After bishop c8, computer shows White is completely winning after rook b8, all due to the constraints of time. So I mean, probably bishop a6 or something was better. I'm not able to tell. For the moment, what is the best proposition, but this is really, unpleasant because, it shouldn't be like this. After rook b8, White is simply winning. So we have seen a small tragedy in making. That's not very pleasant, for the defender. You play the whole game, and then you make a terrible mistake, and end up in a lost position. After bishop f6, this is very interesting because White, for some reason, has managed to sacrifice the piece. I'm not sure if it can be, enough because Black has extra piece. In the middle game, the pieces are more valuable than the pawns, and the pawns are not so much advanced. Black is threatening bishop d4, and well, so it shouldn't be possible. Like rook d2 is bishop g5, I believe. Bishop g5 or queen c4, whatever. I mean, this is a position where Black, after queen c4, there is the threat of bishop g5, there is a threat of queen b5, and so on. Queen c4 is probably the best move. Another small tragedy, because the position, I think, was for a long time basically equal or close to equality, but Black managed to win the bishop somewhere and get the better chances. Okay, we can even look backwards. Like after queen a7, there was queen d1. queen a7, queen d1, king f2, g6. Still equal position according to computer. After queen e5, of course the position is dangerous because you can attack on the dark squares, and white doesn't have a proper attack. Bishop d5, b4. I mean, in this position after bishop d5 I wouldn't be worried for white, but later on she must have made a terrible mistake. b4, bishop d8, c4, queen a3, bishop g3, queen a6. Okay, I mean, you can't take on b4 because of queen g6. That's not good at all. I mean, especially because, well, the king will be too open. Queen a6, c5. So, queen f6, king g1. Oh, queen f6. Of course, you have to defend somehow. Queen f3, bishop f3, king e1. Anything is better than king g1, queen d4. This is a fruit of the time trouble. And after b5, bishop f6, this is what we saw. And now queen c4, and the game is over. Well, white simply overlooked the bishop on d5. I'm believing that she is already in a much better position. Sorry. And after queen f6, it was only equal, despite the advance of the white's pawns, because on the dark squares, white is very vulnerable. King on f2 was not safe and all that. So now the game is over. Winning for black, of course. Of course. Then we have another situation. Black managed to find some counterplay. I mean, in the situation where we saw the position with bishop on d5. When the bishop was on d5 and the whole thing was unpleasant. We saw actually this position after knight d3 last time. Computer says, retroactively that it was +2.5. We understood that white is much better. And now they managed to simplify the position towards the position that is still much better for white. Now, I mean, I have a situation with okay, I want to I want to enter the position one more time, like this. Okay, I mean, knight f6 and so on. Knight d6. I was looking at this. King e7, knight f5, king f7. I mean, knight probably belongs somewhere else, but white is still, +2.5. King f1, and now rook d2 would make sense. King g8, king e2, and black doesn't have enough counterplay. So we are able to improve the position. And after bishop e6, the position is still basically winning for white. If white manages to fight knight f5 and stopping all the counterplay, preparing rook h6, rook d6 and all that, black doesn't really have enough counterplay for the missing pawn. So white should be winning here, which is 1 point for Switzerland. And as we saw this, reaching this position, black is still better, but only on paper. Computer says this is practically equal. It's not able to. Black is not able to improve the position significantly. We are going, king g3, and after king e6, rook d8, king e5. We will attack g7, h7. So this is practically equal. I mean, for some reason, it shows, the time is gone, but, the result is not there. But we will see. Okay, in the next match, we see something that is very painful for black, because white managed, this was the position from the semi-Slav with the bishop and kingside attack. Now you see the fruits of white's labor. White has managed to penetrate with a pawn to e7, and of course, this is a winning position. black has to resign, and computer is showing plus 5.9. That's a way too much. This is something that you can't really appreciate for black. So I presume the game is over, the game was finished. White won, but the result is still not there. Okay, in this position also white is very successful, because white has not only two pieces for the rook, which would be painful enough. I mean, two pieces have value of 6 and something. The rook is only 5. Also, when it is more complicated than just simple endgame, the pieces are more valuable. The more pieces you have, the better off you are. And well, in this position, white is simply having advantage of extra piece. So again, this has somehow stopped. Maybe they will continue. Maybe somebody's making a break, but white has winning position. Okay, h6, but I mean, the position is objectively winning for white. The advantage is simply too much. In the next position, white managed to find a trick. d7 is a nice trick, because you can't stop queen d7, rook d7, f7 check, rook e5, f8, or rook d7, f7, and then taking on e8 or some such. So after d7, the game is completely over. The tricks are successful. The Hungarian lady has won. So Hungary is leading. They managed to win also. In this position, after rook c1. I mean, black suddenly has a little bit, too many rooks, and with rooks and also the pawn, pass pawn on d2, and with rooks, black has managed to stop the counterplay with a c pawn. King is weak on a3. Of course, this is absolutely unplayable position. So I mean, queen d7 was a decisive mistake. Well, the lady had to play something else, like I mean, queen a7, rook e1 is a bad move because now you can take on e8. For some reason she played only queen d7, and that's not good enough. I mean, queen d7 is unbelievable. Queen e8. I mean, well, in time trouble, it's possible to overlook everything. And now after queen e3, rook c6, rook a1, c7, rook c1. Of course, the game was over. Remarkable, example of the chess blindness, because after queen e8, white is in no way worse. Then we see the game that we have seen several times: bishop e3, knight g4. And well, all the other games are basically over. White managed to extricate herself without clearing the first rank. That's a great success, because after queen e6 there is only queen e6 winning, but I mean, she finds no way of defending the rook. If she plays rook g8 and rook g8, queen b8 mate, rook d8 is mate, queen b6 is rook e8 mate. Something strange has happened. Okay, queen a2, queen b3. I mean, something strange. Something really strange. I mean, she believed that after queen a2, knight c3, queen b3 is a bad move. Rook e1, queen c4 still okay. I mean, without a piece. But after queen b3, there is rook e8, rook e8, rook d8. She didn't suspect, black didn't suspect that there might be a problem on the back rank, due to the fact that the queen on b6 is under attack, and well, also the rook on d1 was under attack. This is very interesting. You can take on a5 with a white queen, but then queen b3, queen d1 is killing the rook, and rook e1 will be delivering mate. No, not even that. Queen a5 is also winning. Queen a5, queen d1, knight d1, and rook e1 is not possible because the queen from a5 is protecting e1. So even queen a5 is winning, but rook d8 is way better, because after rook d8 there is inevitable mate, or queen e6, queen e6, and then rook d8, queen e2, and white is completely winning because she has the queen for the rook. So a bad blunder, so a win for Slovenia. Now it will be queen g5. Okay, that's the uh, end of the story, because you have a pawn ending after inevitable queen g5, a takes g5, 3 against 1, and the d pass pawn is not running forward, so that's perfectly fine. So white has managed to win, and in the last match there is also queen f6. So okay, I mean, if you are lost, like move queen f2. I mean, this is the game that we saw, rook f4. I mean, we saw the part of the game here after rook f4. This rook f4, queen f4, rook c5, rook d7, queen h3, rook d2, and now queen g3 is better than queen g2. I mean, she's even refusing to acknowledge the fact that she can't play actively with white because black has better pieces. I mean, well, better coordination and all that. And now the threat, not queen e1 but rook d1. So I mean, after queen e3, rook c1 was suddenly necessary, and after rook f2, the rook on c1, she had to go to, the rook had to go to c1. But now after rook f2, the piece is gone, and of course all the rest is probably unnecessary, because black is completely winning. This is very easy. So okay, I mean, they everybody makes mistakes. I mean, the game we saw, when I said like black has no problem, it ended like this. Stopping all the activity on h4, f4, and so on. I mean, the only factor of asymmetry is the c pawn against the e6 pawn. Other than that, the position is locked, and both players are happy that they have managed to find a way to draw the position. And then we can see, I mean, the position that I was praising for black, when I saw the position with bishop on h6, it ended in tears, because now after knight e1, bishop f4, any which way you take, there is a queen c1, knight c2, knight b1, knight c2 mate, or queen e1 taking on e1, rook e1, bishop g3. I win the exchange, and I mean, I have many pawns exchange and many pawns more. So this is completely lost for white. So it wasn't, probably the white player wasn't on a par with the black player, because this was rather one-sided. And now the position where we saw rook a7. This is the position with bishop d1. We looked at the critical moment. Critical moment was this. Queen d1, rook d1, c d5, and bishop e2, rook c8, bishop e2, b4. I mean, okay, rook c1. I understood after bishop d1, which is a bad move. I said rook c8 is much better. Rook c1, bishop e2. Now d takes e6, bishop e3 is better. After b4, black can still play. Knight b7, f6 is better, to oppose, to fight. And after knight b7, now white plays rook d8, rook c7, knight d8, knight d7, and unfortunately the d pawn that I have predicted will be deciding the game is now a superpower and very difficult to stop. It's not like it's a loss or anything, but I wouldn't want to face the d6 pawn in my game. I wouldn't be content. I wouldn't be happy at all. So d6, and well, that's why white managed to penetrate with a pawn, and in the end of the game, bishop c5, threatening bishop e7, threatening rook c8, and so on. Everything is winning. I mean, it's not the material, it's the position, and all due to the pawn on d6 that was too strong. Okay, I mean, the position where I was praising black, where black had these two pawns in d4 and e4, it certainly was very unpleasant. It certainly was the position that was critical. King f7, I didn't like king f7 that much. d3, okay, b4, very weak. a5, oh no, no, I mean, sorry, rook d8, obviously, b5, a5, king f1, and at some moment, d3 was necessary, but okay, they play very cautiously, and now d3, b4, a takes b4, bishop d4, and then the rook is trapped on e5. After rook c5, black is 2 pawns up, so this is really, a little bit too much for comfort. So, obviously black has won. So, of course, it doesn't really help to have the rooks, against some compensation, because the rooks need to be able to play. If you can't utilize the rook, actually the opponent is better than yourself. Okay, there is still a match, France against Slovakia. Black managed to return the extra exchange. So now the position is materially equal. This is, very drawish indeed. This is on the level of, unplayable equality. And, here after king g1, white is only slightly better because we have knight e3, knight b2, and so on. I mean, for some reason, white managed to misplay the game to the level where black could able to save herself. I think this was a very difficult position, when we saw it last time. So, I see the chances for black, great chances to draw the game. And here, white is still fighting. This is the position is terrible because white king is very unsafe on the a file. Computer is saying -4, which is not pretty at all. And black just has to find, do we play bishop e7? Do we play rook c1, threatening rook a1, then bishop e7, and all that? I don't like the position in the least. No, I believe, okay, rook b8. Rook b8 threatening going down. Okay, we don't let him play knight d8 or let her play knight d8 or something. Even rook b3 might be unpleasant. A takes b3, b2, and then the b pawn is very strong. And, it's very difficult to play for white. So, basically, white player is lost. And, on the last board, as I suspected, unfortunately, the position was not good enough for win. So, white was able with 2 bishops, despite the handicap of 2 pawns, to save her graces. So we can as well turn back and see, what has, has been played in the open, because, this is interesting. Black somehow managed, to get the position that is nearly playable, but after g5, computer is still insisting, this is winning for white, technically speaking, because black is not able, to hold the position. I mean, opposite color bishops are not in his favor when he takes on d4, the rook against bishop, with a potential of a6 and so on. I mean, this is technically lost, so it will be very difficult for black to play. White should be winning. Then we have a draw, and then we have, we have looked at this draw. So, I mean, just the final position. Okay, this is, we discussed this last time. Dots are knight f3, we saw, and then, I mean, this position we saw in the process. And white truly cleverly put the rook on b6, where it's paralyzing all the activities of the opponent, and there is no chance for black. If he goes to c8 with a king, then the f7 pawn is weak, so black has no chance to convert his better pawn structure into something tangible. I mean, that's unrealistic. There is a game still being played. This should actually be very pleasant for black because black can torture white for a while, but it's very limited and not very pleasant to play with white with a bishop, but nominally speaking it's only somewhat better for black. Computer says 0-3. I mean, I had a similar ending, and I was tortured enough. I don't believe it's so easy to make a draw here, but it should be possible. But this game will continue for a while. I can guarantee you that, because black will be willing or trying to win this. Okay, this is something that we have been looking at last time when we have been here. Okay, like this. I believe after bishop f6, bishop h6, we saw this position. a3, dubious, rook d1, bishop h6, queen c5, bishop g7, king f7. Okay, it was possible to play bishop g7 and queen f8, but after queen f7 it won't be pretty, because after bishop f6 I'm threatening queen h5 and queen g6, mating. After queen c2, mate is unavoidable. Queen e5 is best, but okay, this is funny, because now the position is completely over. I mean, queen e5 is nice, but not realistic. And now white played rook d7 and e1, because rook d8, rook f8, queen g7, and so on. So I mean, queen e8, rook d8, rook f8, and black resigned, of course, because this is unplayable. Queen g7, queen e7. I mean, it doesn't really help to have a counterplay that is coming too late. But obviously, in chess, one of the top priorities is to tame down initiative of the opponent. So it's not so much or not only what you are doing yourself, but you should be very much aware of what the opponent wants to do to you, and you try to limit the danger by playing actively, by having good pieces, by having the pieces on a good spots, and so on. Okay, here is the position that we have seen before. Technically speaking, this is winning for black, or nearly winning for black, -2.5. Very difficult to play for white. I mean, this is the game that we mentioned, Slovakia, Czech Republic. Okay, I have to open the door. 1 second. Okay, sorry, I had to open the door. So, this is very difficult. I'm not saying black will win the game, but, this is something that it's a torture for white for the, last 30 or 40 moves. And, we won't know the result. And, most of the other games are finished. I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I am finishing for today. We will hear and see each other tomorrow at the round number 5. Thank you very much.